football club is very different. It has a heart and it has a soul that's linked to the ownership group. But when a player joins this football club, I take them for a walk around the pitch and I talk to them about their involvement in community, what is going to be expected from them. If you don't want to sign up to that, if you don't want to engage and genuinely work with our local community, it doesn't matter how good you are on the grass, join another football club. It's a fundamental set of values that I believe will see us run towards adversity on and off the pitch when difficult times come, because as Jason Schechterly said, be under no illusion, the difficult times are around the corner and they will come. How you face those difficult times, how you tackle adversity will define what you are as a football club. And I think that makes us a very, very different club to many others.
So I had this intro planned about us looking over Portman Road and what have you, but right before we got into camera, you mentioned your debut for West Bromwich Albion against none other than Real Madrid. I'm just going to leave it to you and explain the best debut ever and then what followed.
That's a very long time ago. You're making me feel very old. Yes, I was an 18-year-old, as we call it, scholar now at West Bromwich Albion, and I was coming to the end of my career there. I knew really I wasn't going to be good enough to have a long-term career playing the game. But right at the end of my time at West Bromwich Albion, we had a tour of the United States. It was a 3 or 4 team tournament, Real Madrid, FC Cologne, Vasco da Gama. And in essence, my first ever game at senior level was for West Brom against the mighty Real Madrid. Great experience. The likes of Sam Allardyce were in the team with me, Don Goodman, who's now a broadcaster, Craig Shakespeare, who's a professional coach, has been a manager, plus other players at that time. And it was a great experience against world-class players like Bebeto, Hugo Sanchez, Godilio. We won't talk about the results, but it was a great experience.
As we look over Portman Road then, steeped in the legacy of a Sir Alf Ramsey, a Sir Bobby Robson, I can't help but be drawn back to those scholar days, because as an 18, 19-year-old, you're coming towards the end of that. What do I need to know about the lessons, the influences you were exposed to up until then to understand the man I'm sitting in front here today?
There are links. There are links that people probably won't be aware of. My first youth team coach at West Bromwich Albion from when I was 14 was Nobby Stiles, World Cup winner, footballing legend, who not only educated us in, if you like, how to play football, but educated us on how to be good citizens, the difference between right and wrong, how to conduct ourselves, what winning would take, what it would take to be a professional footballer, and gave me a real good grounding, a difficult, tough grounding at the time, but a grounding I've never, ever forgotten. And then the Ipswich links start, because in my second year as a scholar, Nobby left the club and was replaced by a coach called Cyril Lee, who was Bobby Robson's assistant here at Portman Road. And Cyril came to the Hawthorns at that time because our first team manager was former Ipswich legend Brian Talbot. So again, the Ipswich links, at this time I'm 16, 17, 18 years of age, so I don't ever see these links 30 years down the line. So there are links between my time in my early career at West Brom and now here at Ipswich. But these were people who understood the game, understood the importance that the club played in its local community, and gave me a real good grounding in my very, very early years. I come from West Bromwich. I come from a very working class family. Dad worked in a foundry, Mum worked in an office, and had a family who supported me all the way through, so made sure that I could get to training, that I was brought up in the right way, that I did my schoolwork. But I was a local lad in West Bromwich who followed his local team, was passionate about his local team, and worked his way through to get an opportunity to play for his local team. But what I didn't understand at that time was that was just the start of the journey.
And I want to start on that journey. And I think a lot of players find themselves now, have in the past, where they've had to ask themselves similar questions as you did when you come to the end of your scholar days. Now what? How did you process that? And in what ways is football a valuable teacher when you do take on that next challenge?
I think I look back and I think it was probably, it was a fork in the road for me. And it was a difficult time because from the age of 9, I always felt that I knew what I was going to do. I was going to be a professional footballer. I was going to play for West Bromwich Albion. I was going to have that career. That's what everything in my life was geared at. So at 18, when I self-realised and was told I wasn't really going to be good enough, it was a watershed moment in my life. And at that point, I had panic. Real worry about, well, what do I do next? Because everything can be geared to that point. But all the way through, where I was very fortunate, I was grounded by parents that made me continue my education. So even when I left school at 16, and I joined West Brom as a scholar, you could do 2 educational courses. You could do the local educational course, which the majority of the lads did because they had to, or I could do an applied business and sports BTEC course, which was then the equivalent of 2 A-levels. But that meant every Thursday travelling to Coventry, which was a 2-hour plus journey there, a 2-hour journey back. But I did it, and my parents were instrumental in saying, look, you've got to continue with your education, you've got to continue with your football, you've got to push on all fronts. And I did that BTEC course. I was really fortunate. That was funded again as part of the Scholars Education Programme by the PFA. And when I left West Bromwich Albion when I was 18, I left with that qualification. That qualification, again, 2 years later, was going to be pivotal. I had 2 years between the age of 18 and 20 away from the game. Played a little bit of part-time football, and was asked to go back on a Tuesday and Thursday evening to West Brom because they knew I was a local lad. Would I help coach some of the scholars? I'm feeling very old at this point, by the way. So I would go back and I would help coach the goalkeepers, coach the under-13s or the under-15s. And I enjoyed that. And I did that probably for around a season and a half. And then there was a reshuffle with the coaching staff at West Brom. Ozzy Ardiles was the first team manager, and Ozzy moved to Tottenham. Keith Birkinshaw, who was his assistant manager, took over as first team manager. And all of the coaching staff stepped up. And the then community officer at the club became reserve team coach. And that left a slot as community officer. And at that point, the community schemes weren't charitable trusts. They were very much in their infancy. And they were funded, in essence, by the PFA. And it was a scheme that was in its infancy, and something that clubs were trialling around the country. And the club suggested, why don't you interview for the role? And I really liked the sound of it. And I remember talking to Dad and saying, look, I'm going to interview for this. And Dad was, Mark, you're 20. There's going to be senior ex-players apply for this job, sports and leisure professionals, temper your expectations. But I applied for the job, I was interviewed, and they gave me the job.
What do you think that is? What do you think in terms of comparing yourself to supposedly more experienced candidates?
You ask an interesting question. At that part of my career, everything I did, everyone told me I was too young to do, or people had more qualifications, more experience, more knowledge, were more well-rounded. That's the one thing in my career that has been a motivator for me. I'm going to prove people wrong. I'm just going to see how far this local lad from West Bromwich can go in this industry. And I was very honest. I talked about the local community, the bridge, the importance, the role that community plays with the club, in inspiring people, in bringing people together. And I showed them a plan. And at 20, that was a very basic plan. And they offered me the job. But again, I then went on a roller coaster for probably the next 18 months. And that was the then manager, Keith Birkinshaw, after around a year of me doing the community job, said, why don't you get involved with the coaching? So I would do the community job, but I would also help coach the goalkeepers. But these were the goalkeepers that a year ago or a year before, I was the scholar or apprentice to.
Right.
So Keith took a real leap of faith in me doing this, but it was something I wanted to do. And I remember knocking on Keith's door saying, Keith, I've got time in the diary, let me take the goalkeepers. We haven't got a goalkeeper coach. I can help. And he said, you're 20, you're too young. And I persuaded him to give me one session. And after the one session, he said, okay, you can do it for a month. And then that turned into Keith then approaching me at the end of the season saying, I'd like you to leave the community role and become youth team coach. So by the time I was 21, having only finished playing when I was 18, I was first team goalkeeper coach and youth team coach, which was a huge responsibility at that age. And I took that on, and 6 months into that, Keith Birkinshaw got the sack. Managerial change, these things happen. And the club released all the coaching staff, but said to me, look, we'd like you to stay, but we'd like you to revert back to your community role. And I wasn't sure. I really wasn't sure, because I didn't like then the volatility around managers changing. You could lose your job and you've done nothing wrong. So I decided to stay. I took a leap of faith, trusted the board, trusted the ownership, and stayed. And this was a point in time where clubs didn't have CEOs. It was the old club secretaries would run everything. But again, I had a thirst for knowledge. And I thought, well, if I'm going to go back to the community trust, again, funded, paid for by the PFA, I'm going to be the best that we can be at this. And I then embarked on probably another 10-year career at West Brom, where I had numerous roles, but the trust, the community foundation stayed with me. It was my core responsibility. And whether I was running the club's academy, whether I was running commercial, marketing, developing stadia, developing international partnerships, the community trust stayed with me because it was my undying passion. My passion and belief that football clubs can impact its local community in ways no other organisations can. And in that 10-year period, just as I'd been to Keith Birkinshaw, I was a pain to my CEOs. Knocking on the door, I want to learn. Can I get involved in this? Can I do this? Can you teach me this? And in the back of my mind, I'd made the decision that long term, I wanted to be a CEO. And that continued. And when I was probably around 29, Mike O'Leary, who is now the chairman of Ipswich Town Football Club, joined West Bromwich Albion as their CEO. Mike stayed with us for about a year and then moved on. And in my head, I wanted to be CEO. And the chairman then at the time decided he was going to be a chairman and CEO, he was going to run it himself. And I had a really difficult decision to make. Do I sit here for the next 10 years and be comfortable, or do I take a leap of faith and try and find my own path? So in 2004, I left West Brom and joined Watford at 30 years of age as CEO. And I joined a club that was struggling, had sold its stadium, but in my head I had a plan on how I wanted to build football clubs.
You mentioned the word build there. You've described yourself as a builder. When you came to the club, it says you go into clubs, you build, that's what you do.
Yeah.
Where do you start? And how do you convert the verbalization to
Yeah.
implementation when it comes to that?
People. The most important asset, in my opinion, that football clubs have are their people. Boards own the equity, the physical asset of the football club, but the supporters really own the football club. These amazing organisations are community assets, and I believe whether it's the board, the staff, the players, the fans, the manager, the operating staff, your people are your most important asset. So for me, when you start, I have a very clear plan in my head on how we operate the football clubs. The staff here will tell you they know what that plan is. But the plan never works without the right people. So having like-minded people with me who understand my vision, but also understand the culture that I want to set at the football club, top to bottom, you can't do it without that. So for me, it's people are so important.
Talking about building teams, and you've been here for a bit over a year and a half. You came in, you brought an all-new performance team in to aid the operation, to work alongside the first team manager. You brought in a director of football operation, new heads of finance, media, the management of Portman Road as a venue. It's quite the team you're building. How do you let people know what you expect of them?
You have to give them clarity. We have to give the staff, the players, the manager absolute clarity. So whether you're Kieran McKenna, or whether you're Sammy Morsey, our captain, whether you're our community staff, whether you're Andy Rolls, our performance director, they have absolute clarity for me. They have technical clarity around what I expect from them to perform in their role and the outcomes that I want. But equally, they have absolute clarity on how I expect them to behave as people. We create learning environments at the clubs that I work at. You can tell by the grey hair, I've been doing this a long time, but I learn every day. And that's the most exciting part of my role, is learning every day. So we're in a world that changes. You know, from a commercial aspect, you've moved from fixed asset sales to a very digital world. So we have people in and around our business now who really understand and are experts in that digital world. So the opportunity for me to learn from those digital experts, the opportunity for me to learn from performance analysts who are becoming more educated, more qualified by the day, to learn from new style of ground staff who really understand the technology behind constructing grass pitches. It's a learning environment. It's really important that people, I say this to people, whilst I have the privilege of being the figurehead for this organisation, I simply manage the people who run the business. The department heads, the professionals in their areas run the business. My job is to design the structure, the vision, the strategy, and then bring in the right people to deliver it. And if you like, I sit at the centre as a pivot and make sure that we're communicating effectively, that we're sticking to the plan, that we challenge each other, and we get better every day. But I simply manage the people who run the business.
And one of the more public figures, representatives of a club, including yourself, is obviously the manager.
Yep.
And a few months into your tenure here, you're forced to make a managerial change. You ultimately turn to Kieran McKenna, and not too dissimilar from the managers you made in the past, and the likes of a Brendan Rodgers, Sean Dyche, and Eddie Boothroyd, you gave early chances to.
Yeah.
What are the considerations being made then? Are there a certain set of values, a certain kind of personality that you're looking for in a hire such as a manager?
You've just made two really good points within your question. It's an area where at times I will be criticised because I will tend to buck the trend. So I think sometimes it's easier to appoint an established manager who has good experience, will have achieved certain things in their careers. But I've always had a passion, as within all areas of the business, about giving people an opportunity and for us trying to be slightly different. So you're right, whether it was a young Eddie Boothroyd replaced by Brendan Rodgers, you know, working with the likes of Sean Dyche and Malcolm Mackay, also at Watford, a Michael Appleton, a Lee Johnson, a Kieran McKenna. They are of a certain type of young up-and-coming coach/manager. And if we talk about Kieran for a second, when I interviewed Kieran, we never talked about the technical side of his ability, how he's going to play, the team he's going to pick, how he's going to coach, how he'd want to run the training ground. I've done my homework. I know what he can do in that. The bit that is important to me is his EQ. Not necessarily his IQ, but his EQ. What are his values? Does he have a work ethic? Is he going to do the right thing when no one else is looking? How is he going to handle the pressure? How is he going to develop his staff? Will he fit into the community ethos? Will he genuinely be part of it, work as part of a team where the collective is so important? That was the whole interview for me. Technically, I know he can do the job, but does he have the values that match to what we're putting into this organisation? And after 10 minutes with him, it's absolutely clear, yes, he does. And I think what you're now seeing at Ipswich is a rebirth of a very big, established, traditional football club that has had some of the most amazing successes in the past, but has gone through 2 decades of underinvestment, on and off pitch failure, and now needs to be reborn in a new way. And I feel McKenna is a type of manager, he will understand and respect hugely Robson, a club that's won European honours. He respects that, but understands what he needs to do to relight this club and take it forward. And I think at the moment you're starting to see that success build.
In running of a business, results, profits are the obvious metrics of what success looks like. But beyond that, what does success look like for you in the running of Ipswich?
You ask a question that we actually talked about this week. So we're doing a lot of work in and around the stadium at the moment. You know, behind the stadium, there's new turnstiles, there's land been acquired. We're rebuilding the whole infrastructure of the football club. But everything that you do at the football club can't simply pivot on, oh, it's amazing because we've won at Bristol Rovers, but because we haven't won at Bristol Rovers, oh, everything's a disaster. So managing that emotion in the running of the football club, the emotion of the owners, the board, the CEO, the players, the fans, the manager is key. And sometimes you've got to shut the noise out and you've got to stick to your plan. And it's difficult when you've got 29,000 people in here who are either hugely high or hugely low. So success for me is progression. Off the pitch, it's easier to measure. Are we selling more shirts? Are we selling more tickets? Are we making more revenue? Are we getting more viewers on iFollow? You can see that as a normal business would in its growth. On the pitch, at 3 o'clock on a Saturday when we kick off, I'm rendered useless. I can't do anything. And there but the width of the post, is that success? Is that failure? So it's keeping a level head. I think on the pitch, all I ask of my managers and my teams is each year, I'd like to see progression. We finish higher, we finish higher. And if you do that, ultimately, you will get success. You will be promoted. But what I'd like us to build here is sustainable success. I don't want to build a team that goes up, comes down, goes up. I want to go up and I want to build for further success. That links back into the type of player we've recruited, the type of manager that we've recruited. Someone who's a builder, can develop, can win games, and persuade players from Premier League and Championship clubs to leave, come to League One, and be part of a journey all the way through. And that's what myself, Kieran, the recruitment team, the backroom staff have done with Nathan Broadhead, Harry Clark, Leif Davis coming from Leeds. These were big decisions for these players to come all the way back down from Premier League clubs to League One. You know, you're leaving Arsenal, Wigan, you know, these Leeds United, big clubs, but be part of our journey because I think we can take this football club right back to where it used to be.
The club's philosophy is also running towards adversity.
Yeah.
In the running of a successful business, how much do you think dealing with discomfort is correlated with its success in terms of from an organizational perspective, but also from an individual perspective?
I think one thing that you learn about in this industry as a CEO is if you're going to do this for a long time, you better get comfortable being uncomfortable. Because when you wake up in the morning as a CEO of a football club, whilst you may have your diary laid out and planned, you have no idea what's going to happen. You know, we're dealing with elite athletes. You know, we can plan a recruitment strategy. We have a 3-game week and we lose 4 players to injury. Our commercial revenues can hugely swing on whether we win or lose on the pitch. So you are managing a multifaceted, a multidisciplined business on an hourly basis. That's tough. It is tough. But you just asked a question which I'd like to pick up on about the words running towards adversity. One of the ways in which we're very different at this football club is we're funded by a United States pension fund. That's platinum plated, clean money pumped in to a football club that has a plan. And whilst I have owners who always call me about the performance on the pitch, will equally call me and say, Mark, I'd like to see a report on your community engagement. I want to understand what you've done, what the manager's done, what the players have done. How are we impacting the lives of our community? How are you working with the local authorities? How are we working to reduce crime, improve health? What are we doing with the aged community, by the way, of our dementia cafe? What are you doing with refugees? It's a very different approach. This was summed up in the summer, where we made a decision to take all of the, let's call it the Michael Jordan type words down from the stadium and the training ground. All the cliches came down. And the only set of words that we have around the club are running towards adversity. We had a gentleman visit us called Jason Schechterly. So Jason Schechterly is a former Phoenix, Arizona policeman who was horrifically burnt and injured in a car crash. Disfigured terribly, and joined us and the first team on a visit in the summer. So Jason came and met the players and talked to them about his story. He also talked to the community staff, the commercial staff, the academy staff. And Jason spent time talking to the staff and the players about what had happened to him, and how he had managed to live his life, progress, carry on following these horrific injuries. One of the most inspirational people I've ever met. And simply said to the team, so when you're 1-0 down away at Fleetwood, that's not adversity. This is adversity. He is a pension holder from the fund that manages our football club. We are who he represents. And what he did was bring a bond between the pension fund, the players and the staff and the fan base. We had the words running towards adversity sewn into the strips. So every time the team run onto the pitch, that's an acknowledgement of who we represent, the community we represent. This football club is very different. It has a heart and it has a soul that's linked to the ownership group. We're so fortunate to have them. But when a player joins this football club, Kieran does all the technical and tactical introduction. I take them for a walk around the pitch and I talk to them about their involvement in community, what is going to be expected from them. And at the end of the day, we say to them, look, this is what you're signing up to. If you don't want to sign up to that, if you don't want to engage and genuinely work with our local community, it doesn't matter how good you are on the grass, join another football club. Because you are going to have to buy into our values. Kieran is brilliant at standing behind that, and all of the players we've just signed have been fantastic. If you look at our community engagement work on the pitch, our stats have gone through the roof. And it's a fundamental set of values that I believe will see us run towards adversity on and off the pitch when difficult times come. Because as Jason Schechterly said, be under no illusion, the difficult times are around the corner and they will come. How you face those difficult times, how you tackle adversity will define what you are as a football club. And I think that makes us a very, very different club to many others.
How you handle that, I'd assume, also comes from experience.
Yep.
As we come towards the end here, how would you compare a Mark Asthon starting off at Watford to the one here today?
I love that question. I wish I could talk to him. I really do, because I think as a young 29, 30-year-old, you think you know it all, and you don't. You clearly don't. As a 51-year-old now, I fully understand still how much I learn every single day, and I enjoy that. At 30, I talked to Kieran about this last week. At 30 years of age, when adversity hit, my reaction was to go harder, go faster, do more, do longer hours. At 50, when adversity hits, I slow down. I go up into the helicopter, I breathe, I look down, and I evaluate more. And I coach and develop the people around me to make sure that not only I can get through the adversity, but they can get through the adversity with me as well. So I think experience, knowledge, age helps in that, and having good people around you. Because I go back to it, I am simply the person that manages the people that run the business. And the quality of those people, the emotional intelligence of those people is so, so important. And I've been very, very fortunate in my career to both work with and find very talented people who have either helped develop me or I've been able to assist in their development. But I believe football is the people's game. It's a people business, and the right people are most definitely our most important assets.
And lastly, Mark, you're a great example of someone who has made the transition from being a scholar, as we started off with in this conversation, to now being CEO of Ipswich. What would your advice be to current players, former players, people in general, about entering the executive level of football?
I think the mantra for me on the pitch and off the pitch is very simple. Hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. And this industry, is tough. If anyone could do it, then everyone would do it. And I find it strange at times when, you look at other industries. If I went into, if you asked me to fly a plane tomorrow, the one thing I promise you I'm going to do is I'm going to crash that plane. Mm-hmm. It's the same in football. It's a multifaceted industry where it takes time to learn and to understand. We've got some very skilled executives in the industry. I think there's probably more of a gap for former players to move from the performance side to the executive side, because you get a rounded view of what the whole club looks like. If you've only ever worked on the performance, or you've only worked on coaching, or you've only worked in commercial, you only really understand that element. I think I've been so fortunate that as I was developing, that my CEOs at clubs I was at allowed me to work in different areas and just absorb knowledge. So I think my advice to anyone who wants to get into football and into the executive management of football is absorb knowledge. And that means you're going to have to work hard, because you may have to go and work in places that you don't particularly want to, but you need to absorb the knowledge in those areas. And I think that gives a much more rounded view on how to manage clubs.
Mark, thanks a lot. Appreciate
Pleasure.
that.